Hello and welcome to Madison HubSpot User Group's Automating Tedious Sales Processes. Um, we'll give everybody another minute or so to join, but then I want to roll right into the presentation that we have today because it is a short week and want to make sure that everyone gets time back as needed. So we'll just give everybody about a minute or so and then get started. All right, let's jump right in. Today we're talking about how to automate tedious sales processes using HubSpot workflows. My name is Katie Cartwright. I'm the inbound marketing manager at Madison Marketing Group. And if you have any questions during the presentation, after the presentation, a week later, after you've thought of something, feel free to reach out to either myself or anyone on our team. We can be reached at support@madisonmarketing.com. Today, we will go over a couple different things, briefly talk about why we need workflows for sales, go over basic workflow and property tool overview, and then talk about 8 different types of things that we can automate using a HubSpot workflow. So first up, why do you need sales automation? InsideSales.com did a study that found on average, salespeople only spend about 35% of their time selling. And HubSpot did their own research and found that 27% of salespeople are spending at least an hour or more on data entry each day. And going back to that inside sales study, you can see how salespeople are spending their time. Just basic breakdown here. I'm looking at these red bars here. These are admin tasks and general follow-up, not really tasks that move the prospect closer to a sale. They're the tedious things that salespeople have to do to create and maintain records or create and maintain a surface level relationship with a prospect. General follow-up, while expected, doesn't really get anyone further down the funnel, so we don't really count that as a selling activity. And these two tasks together represent more than 25% of a salesperson's average day. Today, we'll talk about some specific things that can be done to automate these types of tasks and give some of that time back to the sales team. We can start doing that with HubSpot sequences. So there's no reason that general follow-up should be taking over 11% of your rep's time. It's important, but it doesn't have to take that much time at all. If you happen to have Sales Hub Pro, you have access to the automated email sequences tool, and your reps can personalize email templates and then schedule them to be delivered at whatever cadence is most appropriate for your audience. If the person responds to the email or books a meeting, the sequence automatically ends. Companies without a paid Sales Hub subscription can still save time with general follow-up by creating templates and snippets, up to 5 each when you're using the free version of HubSpot Sales Hub, and insert those into your emails and send them directly from HubSpot. So let's talk about those admin tasks. Those are things like lead assignment, filling out contact details, and then managing your calendar to keep track of when you need to reach out to your leads. You can automate a lot of that admin stuff using HubSpot workflows. That's the automation tool in HubSpot. If you're a marketer, you're probably familiar with using it to update properties, send internal notifications, and of course, use it for lead nurturing. But because HubSpot is designed as an all-in-one system, you're also able to use that same marketing workflows tool to create automations that benefit the sales side of your business. And because workflows are systematized, they can help create a more accurate and efficient sales process while reducing the amount of manual work your sales team has to do. Let's quickly go over HubSpot's workflows tool, which can be found in the main dropdown under automation. Once you're in the tool, you have the option to build a workflow from scratch or start with a templated workflow. The workflow templates are a good place to get ideas for the kinds of workflows you might want to build. But if you're already comfortable with the tool and know what you want to accomplish, starting from scratch might save you some time. Under the Start from Scratch option, you can build workflows centered around contacts, companies, deals, and a few other options not shown here in the screenshot. And each workflow has two basic requirements: enrollment and action. To build the enrollment criteria, you can choose from one or many of HubSpot's data points, which are able to be combined in almost whatever way you need. Here, you're also able to set up re-enrollment criteria for workflows in which you want to allow someone to go through the process more than once. Once you've set your enrollment criteria, second step is to configure your actions. What should happen when someone is enrolled in the workflow? There are a lot of options here that can be combined in different ways. Highlights include delaying an action further down the workflow, sending the contact an email or sending someone an internal notification email, or setting property values. Prior to publishing your workflow, you want to take a look at settings. Depending on what your workflow is designed to do, you can manipulate the settings to include a suppression list for contacts that shouldn't be enrolled in the workflow, or set things like days and times that the workflow should be active. And finally, you'll want to decide whether to set a goal for your workflow. A goal can be used to unenroll someone from the workflow if a certain condition is met. For example, if you set up a lead nurturing workflow, you could set a goal that looks at lifecycle stage change and stops nurturing them when they become a customer. Once that's done, you're ready to review and publish. The other basic setup you'll need to know how to do is to create some of the workflows we'll cover today involves creating a custom property. To get started, go to your settings page and scroll down to the left sidebar until you find properties under data management. Once you're there, you'll see a list of properties. You can create properties for different objects depending on your needs. And then to create a new property, click the orange Create Property button. And the first thing you need to decide once you're there is where the new property belongs. You can create new properties for any of the objects in HubSpot, and you can further add categories based on which group of properties the new one should belong in. Choosing the right object is important to make sure the right information is being used with the right type of object. Adding it to a specific group is more for organization properties. On the first screen, you'll also give your property a name, and you'll want to make sure it's something that's intuitive and meaningful to your team. Then on the second screen, you can choose the type of property and, if applicable, add options. So when thinking about what type of property to create, consider its purpose. For example, you don't want to create a free-form text field if you'll be using the property to create segmented lists. From there, click Create. And finally, it's worth noting that you're able to add custom properties to the sidebar of your object records. This helps ensure that the most important properties are visible to your team. And you can customize your default sidebar properties under Settings. All right. Before we talk about individual workflow setups for sales, let's take a look at the lifecycle stages that we work with. So these 5 stages here are the most commonly used ones in HubSpot. Probably pretty familiar with them. Just a bird's eye view of where your leads are in the buying process with your company. So lifecycle stage is a contact property and a company property, lives in every single one of your records in HubSpot, contacts and companies. The values are not customizable, but the way in which you use them is. So if we look at the transition arrows below, you can see that the transition from lead to MQL, marketing qualified lead, is something that can be done by a system, which means it is perfectly handled by workflows. Once someone moves further down the funnel, there needs to be a little bit more human qualification, but that doesn't mean that those transitions can't also be helped by a workflow. So today we're going to go through 8 workflow setups. The first process that we can automate using a HubSpot workflow is updating some of those contact and or company properties. Good properties to update using workflows are things like territory, lifecycle stage, and then the contact or company owner. We'll walk through each one in kind of a combination setup that gets all of these things set up properly and hands the lead off to sales. So first, let's look at territory assignment. A lot of companies operate using sales territories. So, for example, Mary on your team might handle sales coming from contacts on the states on the East Coast, and Paul might handle sales on the West Coast. The same idea can be applied to larger regions by country or smaller regions by zip code. But because territory definition can vary by company, HubSpot doesn't have a default property or a way to automatically assign new contacts to the correct territory, which is where workflows comes in. To set up a territory assignment workflow, you need to know your contact's location and set up a custom territory property in HubSpot with options that correspond to your company's territories or sales regions. You can ask contacts for their location information using a form or use properties automatically collected by HubSpot when someone visits your website, like IP country or IP region or state. To get started creating the workflow, you'll use the location information, in this example, zip code, as the enrollment criteria. When a contact's zip code matches the enrollment criteria, they'll be enrolled in the workflow. Next, you'll set the action on the workflow. You'll want to choose to set a contact and/or company property. You'll select the territory property and choose to set the value to the option that corresponds with the enrollment criteria. At this point, you might be thinking that you have a lot of territories, which would mean a lot of individual workflows. So depending on how you want to organize your portal, you could create a single workflow with the enrollment criteria being the location property you're using is known. And then from there, you'd build a branching system within your workflow that evaluates and sets the territory property based on the contact's location value. The second workflow we can build to update a property is updating a contact's lifecycle stage. So looking back at our lifecycle stages, we've already determined that moving a contact from lead to MQL can be done by a system. But before you start building a workflow to handle this process, you'll need to think strategically about how your company identifies what a marketing qualified lead looks like. In broad terms, an MQL is someone who's determined to be a good fit to work with your company and is more likely to become a customer than any random person submitting a form. If you're looking at setting an MQL lifecycle stage automatically, you'll want to start by reviewing the data points that suggest someone is more likely to become a customer. You could start by looking at existing customers and look at things at which offers did they take advantage of, which blog posts did they visit, how many times did they visit their site, and which pages did they view, among other milestones your company has identified. From there, you can better define what an MQL for your company looks like. And like most things, you'll want to revisit and adjust the definition periodically. If you don't have time or manpower to dig into that data, a good place to start is with anyone who requests one of your offers and has visited at least one of your service pages. So this shows that they're interested in the information you can provide and interested in your company and the services you offer. Once you've defined the data points that equal marketing qualified lead, simply use them as the enrollment criteria for your workflow, and then follow up with an action to set the contact or company lifecycle stage property to MQL. So that process I described is great for contacts moving through the funnel in the traditional inbound way. But we all know that potential buyers enter the funnel at all sorts of points. So you can create a workflow to accommodate that too. For sales-ready leads, or SQLs, those are people who've raised their hand and said, I need to talk to somebody at your company. You can create a workflow that incorporates those digital contact points like contact form submissions, demo or quote requests, high lead scores, etc., and then sets the contact as an SQL. The last step in this process would be to create a list. So once you have a workflow that sets the property as MQL or SQL, you can easily build a simple list to segment them. And then you can use that list for marketing email purposes, reporting, even integration settings, like a Salesforce inclusion list. If you wanted to only push MQL or higher to Salesforce, you could do that once you have the list. All right, let's talk about updating the contact or company owner via a workflow. So your company probably already has some rules for assigning leads, and you can use those in a workflow. For this example, we'll talk about the territory property, which we already assigned in a separate workflow as part of the owner assignment criteria. You'll see here that we're also incorporating the lifecycle stage being set to MQL. You can, of course, assign owners at whatever point is appropriate for your business, but in some cases, you might not want to bother sales but with having to manage leads until you know that they're at least qualified to buy. Once you have the enrollment criteria defined, you'll set the action to assign the contact owner. You can do this in a few ways. Number one, simply set the property contact owner and then choose the owner. Number two, if you have either sales or service, pro or enterprise level HubSpot subscriptions, you have the option to choose to rotate the leads, which will just rotate the lead assignment between whichever individuals or teams you choose during the setup. And just like the territories workflow, if you have multiple salespeople or teams, you can always set up branching logic within a single workflow to assign all the leads. And then taking this one step further, you can create a task right from a workflow for the salesperson to review the lead. The second workflow setup we'll look at covers lead rejection. So most leads will move forward in the buyer's buying journey, but what if the sales team reviews them further and decides that they're not going to accept those leads? It's necessary to put a process in place for when leads are handed off to sales and sales does not accept them. We need to give our sales team a clear path they can use to send leads backwards or reject them fully. So the first step in building this process will be to create a property we can use to mark when a lead is rejected. This is something you want to put a bit of thought into. So most often, companies will create a property with drop-down options to choose from that explain the reason for rejection. Some examples for why sales might reject a lead are listed here. These are things that sales will learn about the lead at some point in their selling process. The intent with a reason for rejection field is to simplify things for the sales team. Once they determine that someone will not be moving forward right now, they only have to click one thing in order to hand a lead back. And once they've clicked their one thing, updated the reason for rejection property, we can use a workflow to handle the rest. So the second step is to build out automation based on which reason for rejection the salesperson selects. In this example, we're triggering marketing emails and a task based on a lead being rejected because of bad timing. You'll need to build a separate workflow for each reason for rejection. Each workflow should have steps that correspond with the reason for rejection. In this bad timing example, the lead is still good. It's just the timing that's bad. So it makes sense to periodically send emails to stay on top of mind and then check in again later. For someone who, let's say, is out of the region that your company sells to, you want to take steps to mark them as completely unqualified and add them to a suppression list. Our third workflow example that helps sales is by automatically creating tasks. So when someone has moved to a sales qualified lead or even an opportunity, it's likely they're actively being sold to by your sales team. The goal of this workflow setup is to help keep sales notified of what their leads are doing by creating tasks for sales to follow up after important touch points. The first step is to outline all of the different marketing behaviors your sales team would like to get updates about. The second step is to create a workflow where the marketing behavior is the enrollment criteria and the action is either a task or notification. For each of the marketing behaviors, we need to determine if they warrant a task or just a notification. If you want your sales team to follow up with their lead after they take a certain action, create a task. If you simply want them to be aware, then create a notification. This slide also has a few different ways to handle task creation or notifications within a HubSpot workflow, depending on what programs your team uses. Workflow number 4 is for deal stage automation. So one thing that you can do right from your deal pipeline is to create a task or internal email notification when deals reach a certain stage in your pipeline. For example, you can create a notification to accounting to set up billing once the deal reaches closed won. This eliminates the back and forth information exchange between accounting and sales that might happen if this is done manually. Workflow number 5 is for stale deal alerts. So this workflow is for deals that are neither closed won nor closed lost. They're just still sitting there as open deals. This type of stale deal happens all the time. Maybe the prospect just started ignoring the salesperson, or maybe the salesperson was busy working on other deals and one fell through the crack. With this type of workflow, you can resurface those deals and make sure that they're taken care of. So there's 3 primary ways to classify a stale deal. You can use all of these or a select few. The first condition is when a deal has been in the same stage for too long. The second is when a deal has reached a certain total age beyond your average deal age. And the third is when a deal has gone past its estimated close date. So with this criteria set as the enrollment, we can trigger a notification to the rep and or their manager. And the only thing to keep in mind as you get started with this workflow is that it's built as a deal-based workflow rather than a contact-based workflow like the others we've talked about so far. Workflow number 6 is for win-back opportunities. So stale deal alerts cover the deals that are just sitting, but there's also an incredible opportunity with win-back opportunities. These are deals that, for whatever reason, are marked as closed lost. But just because someone doesn't become a customer now doesn't mean, in most cases, that you should write them off as someone who will never become a customer. The first step in this process is to ensure that you have a deal property to store information about why the deal was closed lost. In this example, there are 2 properties. Closed lost reason, which is a free-form text field. You can leave some specific details here. And the second field is a drop-down for closed lost reason category. You'll need to manually add this property to HubSpot and fill it with common reasons your deals are lost. You can get as granular here as you want. And just like building the other workflows, you'll want to use the reason for closed lost to take the appropriate next steps. For example, if your company and your competitors typically sign year-long agreements and you know a deal was lost to a competitor, your workflow might trigger an internal notification and task using the closed lost reason property and the deal close date property that creates a task to follow up after 9 months. The notification and task go to the salesperson, ask them to check in with the lead and see how happy they are with their chosen vendor, and see if there's an opportunity to reevaluate working together. Workflow number 7 helps automate actions around what happens when your point of contact at a company is lost. So this is a workflow that primarily affects contacts at the customer level, although you can set it up for lower levels as well. So HubSpot has standard objects for 3 things: contacts to keep track of individuals, companies to keep track of organizations, deals to keep track of individual sales, and then within each of those, there's data stored in both properties and activities. Everything is working pretty smoothly within your CRM until you find out your main point of contact changes jobs. So typically you find out that information a few different ways. Either they reach out to let you know, you happen to see the change come through on LinkedIn, or you get the dreaded email bounce back saying they no longer work at the company. Once you realize the person you were working with closely has left, you're probably left with more questions than answers. Who should you contact now? How can you figure that out? Who else on your team needs to know about the change? And finally, you're probably wondering about your previous point of contact. Where did they go? If it was great working with them, you probably wonder if there's an opportunity to work together again. And rather than have your salesperson or whoever was the person to receive this info be left to wonder about the answers, you can create a left company property that triggers a workflow full of all sorts of follow up actions for the appropriate people on your team. For example, you could create a workflow that enrolls a contact when the left company property box is checked. From there, you can create a task for sales to investigate finding where that company went and reaching out. You can also use that property as criteria for a suppression list to ensure marketing doesn't keep sending emails that won't be delivered. And you can alert the service team to track down the new point of contact if it wasn't provided. And workflow number 8 has to do with integrating your third-party apps. So over the years, HubSpot has built some really great integrations with apps your company may use outside of HubSpot. And some of these apps have the ability to push information in or out of HubSpot using a workflow. We don't have time to go into the specifics of all of them today, but you can typically find documentation on the implementation setup page or sometimes even in HubSpot's knowledge base articles. And that covers all of our sales related workflows that we can set up. And if you have any questions, I will stick around for a couple minutes. Otherwise, thank you for coming, and I will give you back the rest of your afternoon.